First up, I hope you are all having a wonderful day. So, today we are going to be reviewing The Will of the Money. And I gotta say, I love this book. It was so good, you guys. It was so good. I will say that the opening chapters were a little slow, but they were still very, very interesting because you're getting a lay of the land, you're getting a little bit of the history that's going on with this world. And I think what really is phenomenal for me is this book very much sits on that precipice between science fiction and fantasy. And it very much is a sci-fi fantasy book. You know, some books are strictly just science fiction and some books are fantasy. And this one for me sat really in that precipice, you know, right there in the middle. Because it seems like it's a very kind of sci-fi world. It reminded me of Red Rising a lot, and I think that's why I liked it so much, because I love Red Rising, you guys. I love Red Rising so much. So much. So I think that's part of why I like this book so much. But he's so different from Darrow. So absolutely different. He's definitely younger, right? But I loved just the atmosphere that was going on in this book. It was so good. It was so good. I was pleasantly surprised. This is a book that has been on my TBR. I knew I was gonna like it, or at least I hoped I was gonna like it. I didn't think I was gonna love it this much. To the point where I was reading it and I had to grab the audiobook because I didn't want to put it down. So I wanted to be listening to it as I'm cooking. I didn't want to stop reading it. And in fact, whenever I have to stop, I'm like, oh, damn it, I have to stop now. I would read it during the physical book during my lunch break at work. And I'm like, do I have time for another chapter? Yeah, I can clock in a minute late. It'll be okay. Or I'll be like, oh, I don't have not enough time. I have to stop here. Like, the urgency at which I wanted to continue reading this book was there. It really, really was such a phenomenally written book. I love the characterization, first and foremost. I think the characterization is really, really well done, especially for our main character. I will say, as more characters were introduced, I did struggle with remembering, like, who was who as far as all of his friends go, especially when he goes from class 7 to class 6 to class 5 to class 3, you know, and he's making more and more friends. So I did some of the other characters, like the main characters, like his best friends, I definitely could remember them, but everyone else, I was just, you know, like, okay, who are you again? So I will say that that was just a struggle for me, just because as the story was progressing, we're introducing more and more characters and their dynamics with him. And I did struggle to remember who was who, right? I loved the pacing of the book too, and the consistency of the writing. So you've seen me do book reviews where I complain a lot by the chapter length, like if it's too long, right? Some of these chapters, you know, page count wise, were long, but there was so much intrigue. Like, there's something happening that I completely forgot about it. The only reason I know is because it would be those times during my lunch break. I'm like, okay, how long is this chapter? Do I have enough time to read it before I have to clock back in from lunch? Or do I have enough time to read this chapter before the start of my shift? So that's the only reason I, like, knew how long some of the chapters were. And I'm like, okay, this one's a little long. It'll be cutting it close, but I can probably do it. So even the long chapters didn't even feel long. And that's what I love. That's how you know it's a good book. Some books are daunting to some people. I work in a bookstore. Some customers are just like, they look at the chunkiness of the book and they get scared, right? I look at the chunkiness of the book and I see it as a challenge. I'm like, oh yeah, let's devour you. And I think it's always really, really good when I get a chunky book and I blow through it because it doesn't feel heavy, you know? And I think that's what's really working for this book. There are moments where it is slow and the pacing just does dip a little bit, but not So much so that I lose interest, right? Those are the moments where we're really focusing on the characterization and the character depth and what's going on in his mind and the pressures he feels. Like, he is supposed to be dead. His family was assassinated. You know, he escaped barely at 14. You know, he escaped. He was a kid. And now all of a sudden, he, grew up in an orphanage. He grew up learning how to fight in order to make extra cash. He has battle scars on him. Honestly, he's gone through so much emotionally, and you see that in his characterization. You see him have to struggle and reconcile with who he used to be, with the hierarchy, and how the hierarchy has changed his nation, right? Again, he's supposed to be dead, right? And you get to see people using their will, and that's really the fantasy aspect, people imposing their will on you. And that was really, really interesting, and it seemed very unique to me. Kind of reminded me of like force powers a little bit. Like, these are not the droids you're looking for, kind of thing. They're imposing their will onto someone. But will works in a way that I can't really describe it. Like, you have to read it. Like, because saying, oh yeah, force powers is doing it in injustice, to be perfectly honest. It's just very, very compelling. It's very compelling. It's very thoughtful. It's very emotional, but it's also very tense, as the story's progressing. And as he gets adopted, and then they're like, oh yeah, you have to enter this school. I need you to find out what happened to my brother. And he's like, okay, sure, why not? Whatever gets me out of this, like, nation, because I don't even want to be here. But then he meets people from his past. He sees a future for himself. And I love the journey he goes on. He's like, there's been enough violence. Why do we have to keep inflicting violence? That just kind of discussion that he has with himself throughout the book. It doesn't just happen one time. It happens kind of throughout the book, that he keeps coming back to this idea of why violence? Why do we have to use violence to challenge the world? Why do we have to use violence to institute change or to topple a nation? Like, why do we choose to hurt people? And then you see him when he forms these familial relationships, and the fact that he's lying to everyone about who he is and about his past, so he can't really be himself. So there's a lot of characterization, and I do like those character dynamics, and I like how it lends tension to the pacing, and I love the overall pacing of the story, because again, it's very thoughtful. And even when he's in school, right, you would think that would be, there is a risk. I will say, there are times, again, when the pacing does slow and dip when he is at school, but then you see the challenges he has to face, and it's just, oh god. I think I could talk about this book for hours, honestly. I could probably talk about this book for hours, but does not. I'm going to have to set the alarm during book club for this book, so that way I don't lose track of time. But it is such a well-written and well-structured book. Again, there are points and moments where it does slow down and dip in pacing, but again, those moments are few and far between, and it lends itself to adding more character depth and characterization as the plot progresses. And just the way those plot twists come out of nowhere. Look, that ending, it's a good thing I already own book 2, because if you do not think I'm adding that to my TBR soon, you would be mistaken. That shit's gonna go right on my library card. It's gonna go right on my library card. For sure, dude. It's just such a well-written, well-structured novel. It is a little slow to get into, and it's a little slow to start. That is true. That is a fact. But there's a lot of intrigue I think. There was enough intrigue for me personally to continue reading, and I liked how it reminded me of Red Rising without being Red Rising. You know, it was very different, but the vibes were there. The vibes were there. But it is still a very different book. So, loved it, loved it. I cannot wait to read book 2. I feel like I need to reread that ending because I'm still in shock by it. So before I pick up book 2, I'm totally going to be rereading that last chapter because when I read it, I was like, what? 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 And I'm like, okay, I need book 2 in my hands right now. So, really good book. Highly recommend it. I love sci-fi. And I really do feel like it is a perfect combination of like science fiction and fantasy. And I don't really see a lot of those anymore. Books are either high sci-fi or high fantasy or romantasy or cozy fantasy. And I love all of those. There's nothing wrong with them. But it's rare that you see a book that borders both of those. And I love when a book borders both of those, you know, and is done well. So, on that note, thank you all for tuning in. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with other book loving friends. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, happy reading.